Hello again. How do you fancy interviewing the Prime Minister, Neil Kinnock, or even the two Davids, Steele and Owen? Would you be nervous? And would they answer your questions? Well, today we've not only got interviews with all of them, but the kids who did the interviews tell us what they thought of the politicians' answers. Sometimes during the interview, sometimes afterwards. You'll see. Anyway, first off, Zulhuma Ibrahim and Jonathan Bartram went to an Oxford hotel on Monday to meet both the press and the leaders of the SDP Liberal Alliance, David Steele and Dr. David Owen. Afterwards, our interviewers watched a playback and gave some instant reactions.
In recent days, the polls have been showing a drop in support for the Alliance.
How can you convince the people that an Alliance vote isn't a wasted vote?
I think the way to do that is to convince them of really the power of the Alliance if we were to hold a balance of power. And I believe that's going to be the outcome, that nobody's going to have an outright majority. And then I think people have got to understand that we wouldn't just be letting Labour in or letting the Conservatives in. What we would be doing is having a negotiated programme in which a very large part of what we in the Alliance believe is necessary would be in it. And that, I think, is what's got to get across to people. You can, if you like, be strong in support of the police, in upholding the rule of law, but you can also be committed to being generous to the pensioner and trying to do something
off the point, didn't he?
No.
Quality of care, health service, and in the social service.
He said they're going to take both arguments.
Yeah, but then he started stretching about all the policies and everything, didn't he? What was the need?
Well, why shouldn't he? It's general.
Yeah, but a more solid answer would have helped.
If the Alliance Party did hold the balance of power after the election, would you agree that you would tend towards negotiating and possibly working with Mr Kinnock, whereas Dr Owen would prefer working with Mrs Thatcher?
No, I don't think I would agree with either of those propositions, because what matters to us are not the people we might be working with, but the policies that we could get through on behalf of the country as a whole.
The reason why I asked you that question was that I was hoping for a clearer understanding of the apparent contradiction within the Alliance on defence. In the Liberal Party conference, you claimed you wanted no nuclear weapons, but Alliance still wants to keep some.
No, but the Liberal Party Assembly, you're harking back to last September, doesn't make up the manifesto. It is not what binds our members of Parliament or our candidates. Very important to understand that. And the policy I've just described to you is the one endorsed by the Policy Committee, which is the authoritative body in the party, and the members of Parliament, and all the candidates standing at this election.
Don't you think that the Alliance's chances in this election are undermined by your belief that there is no possibility of there being an Alliance Prime Minister?
We've never said that. Our view, very simply, is that we put our programme before the people. If enough vote for it, we can form an alliance of government. We've got the programme, we've got the people to do it. But what we are arguing is that even if people don't vote for us as an alliance government, they can still have much the same effect on the body politic by having a big enough wedge of alliance members in the next parliament to stop the present political system and to stop either of the other parties having everything their own way. And that's a very appealing instinct for the British people.
I reckon they should push their own policies and not go on about Labour and Conservative.
That's where they come from, isn't it?
Yeah,
Putting both ideas together.
Yeah, but the way they can gain more votes is to push their policies, not attack the other policies. I don't know, that's what we want to know. That's what they should be doing.
They like some of their ideas. They're not attacking them ones, are they?
Yeah, but instead of attacking other people's ideas, why not push forward yours?
Because maybe they like other people's ideas.
But they don't like the other party's ideas.
Dr Owen, if you were to gain power, who would be Prime Minister?
Well, whichever one of our parties had the largest number of MPs. So if there were more Liberal MPs than Social Democrats, David would be the Prime Minister. If it was the other way around, I would.
So how would you decide if there was an equal number of...
Oh, you do ask the most difficult questions.
We'd call you in to referee.
I suppose we'd have to probably go on whichever party had the highest percentage of votes cast for them.
Mr Steele, when you see yourself portrayed as being in the pocket of Dr Owen on Spitting Image, how does that make you feel?
I enjoy Spitting Image. Can't pretend I particularly like that particular puppet. He's got lots of them in his house, of course, but I don't allow them in mine. But you just have to put up with that. I think if politicians lose the capacity to laugh at themselves, if they lose the capacity to accept a certain amount of ridicule, then they shouldn't be in politics.
The attraction of Mrs. Thatcher is her strong will and single-mindedness. Mr. Kinnock is his caring for the vulnerable. What is your personal attraction to the voters?
I hope that we both of us care and have got quite a lot of strength of will. We don't necessarily flaunt it or shout it, but I know David, and I can tell you he's a craggy fighter for the things that he believes in.
I never asked him about the other David. About himself.
There's no secret about that. And I think that that relationship is a very strong one that has developed both between us personally and between our political parties. But it is a combination. I've called it toughness and tenderness. It isn't necessary to think that strength is everything. It can often lead to rather unattractive habits, not listening, authoritarianism, autocratic behaviour. And I don't think that just caring is sufficient. I think there has also got to be a leadership quality, and there's got to be a strength of will and a commitment to carry people through. Obviously, I suppose we think we've got more of the characteristics that are needed. It's up to the electorate. The electorate sort these things out. Judging by the opinion polls, they don't seem to be too dissatisfied with either of us.
But why should we have to choose between caring and strength? There's no reason why we shouldn't have both. And I would have thought that the added quality of the alliance is that we talk plain common sense. And that's something which I think the electorate respects.
When young people go to look for a job, one of the main reasons they are rejected is due to lack of experience. Don't you think you should be refused the job of Prime Minister on the same grounds?
Well, on that argument, you should never have a Prime Minister who hasn't already got years of record of failure in office behind him. I don't accept that at all. I think when you look back through the political history of this country, some of the most successful Prime Ministers have been those who hadn't got previous experience, and some of the most successful governments were those who've come in after a long period in the political wilderness with a radical reforming programme. And that's what we have in this election.
Cat.
Moving quickly on, our second film report this week comes from South Wales, Neale Kinnock country. Jonathan Cray, what's in your report?
The main part of our report is our interview with Neil Kinnock, but we started by asking the people of Penrhys Estate, high above the Rhondda Valley, what hopes they had of finding a job.
That's all I want is a tidy job, like, there's nothing about it, is it? There's nothing here, like, but like I say, there's no factories here anymore.
I went away to Bristol, but I come back, like, because I missed the family and that.
Well, there's no chance whatsoever of me finding a job now, because I'm too old. I'm 40 years of age, and I'm classed as too old to work.
I reckon you should bring more jobs here, anyway. Because I want to work, I don't hang about all my life. I like to work, anyway.
Why should we ask people to move from communities like this to places like the southeast of England, where they would feel like fish out of water? I mean, they are used to small communities with a kind of Welsh Valley background. To go and ask them to live in places like Purley or Bromley, they'd reach suicide within 3 months, you know.
Penrhys housing estate is perched 1,000 foot above the Rhondda valleys of South Wales. Once 40,000 miners worked the coal faces to make this area the cornerstone of the wealth of the British Empire.
Now, living in the shadow of a famous shrine to the Virgin Mary, the 3,000 inhabitants of Penrhys bear the brunt of problems that affect not only the South Wales valleys, but every depressed area in Britain.
Over 90% of the residents here are out of work, and the consequent lack of money and opportunity generate feelings of despondency and anger. Why worry about a bus shelter when you can't afford the fare?
Here, problems such as transport, housing, education, and ironically the price of coal have more significance than political upheavals on a wider stage.
Do you think the result of the general election will have any effect on the lives of the people here?
The danger is convincing people here that it will have any difference at all, because deprivation is such a deep-seated thing by this time that there is a feeling that what's the point of voting? It is an awful feeling of, so what? What difference will it make? I think personally it'll make a great difference if we are going to have resources continually being drained from Wales, and particularly from the rural Wales and the valleys, then we are into a very desperate position over the coming years.
What does the election mean to you then?
It's like a big act it is to me, that's what I think. Big act to show we got a choice, we have no choice really. Big business rule this country, that's it.
I don't think that the state of the country can get much worse than it is now. And I think there's a lot more hope with the Labour government than there is at the moment.
Anything would mean better than we're having now under the Tory government.
And I think it's absolutely pathetic. How can a family of 4 or 5 people live on £70 a week? You just can't do it.
What is very difficult, I think, for young people, your age, for example, 14, 15, 16, is wondering why they should go to school at all if they know they're going to do sort of noddy jobs, you know, when they're 16 plus, and not going to have jobs that are going to provide real satisfaction and reasonable money.
I heard the name so many times and often wondered why. So I myself shall go and see this city in the sky. 951 houses stand united side by side. 951 houses that can be seen from far and wide. The Virgin Mary stands in view through wind and sun and snow, as though she keeps a vigil on the valleys deep below. I cannot help but wonder, friend, just how these people live. What do they have to offer? What do they have to give?
From Penrhys, Rachel and I travelled to Holyhead in Anglesey on a wet and windy day to put some of these worrying problems to Labour leader Neil Kinnock.
What do you consider are the main problems facing this country?
I think the main problem overall is unemployment, not just because of the condition of people who are unemployed and the poverty which they endure and the insecurity which they have, but also because of the way in which that reflects right through their families. And all the figures show and all experience shows that the children of unemployed people are smaller, they achieve less, they're more liable to illness and early death. So that reverberates onwards. But also, it isn't just the condition of the unemployed. Unemployment is an immense weight dragging down the economy.
Yeah, we were filming recently in the Penrhys estate in Rhondda Valley. Yeah, where 90% are unemployed. What can you do about an area like this?
The plans that we've got are targeting plans. In the first 2 years, we've said we set aside £6 billion in order to finance our emergency jobs programme. And that's in order to get unemployment down by 1 million in those 2 years. Now, the way in which we're going to do it is very deliberately to allocate resources in particular areas. One is in construction, in the building and repair and renovation of houses and the environment around houses. Another one, for instance, is in the education and health services, where you can only gain a greater quality of provision if you have a greater quantity of people engaged in providing those personal services. The fact is that if freedom is to be properly exercised in democracy, it must mean a certain level of freedom for everybody. And of course, if you are economically depressed to the extent that people are, and over the length of time that they are, so that it goes on into another generation, you might have freedom in name. You are a citizen of a free society, and you've got to vote, and you can use your voice. But when it comes to choices and chances and the exercise of real liberties, they are withdrawn. Now, it isn't an active repression like in South Africa, for instance, but, or in some of the Eastern Bloc countries, but it is equally a repression of human choice, human spirit, human dignity, freedom. We think that the depressed areas are a great unused resource. A lot of people are locked up in those areas with talents, with qualifications, who simply can't move out, can't get on their bike, as Mr. Tembit said, because even if they go to London, they can't afford to live there. There's nowhere they can get accommodation. They certainly can't move their families. I've got people in my own area who've tried it and had to come back in 6 months. And consequently, if we are generating vitality in those areas of Britain, now discarded, now locked out, then what we're getting is a bigger contribution to the national welfare.
Do you feel you have enough experience to become a successful Prime Minister?
Certainly, yes. You see, all history shows that the definition of success doesn't depend upon prolonged apprenticeships. In the very nature of the job, you can't be an apprentice Prime Minister in any case. Secondly, I think that it really is a matter of judgment and of leadership and of relationship to the realities. Now, in terms of judgment, I'd match mine against anyone. In terms of leadership, I think I've demonstrated very clearly that my leadership is not dictatorial, but it is extremely firm.
I blame Mrs. Thatcher at all.
At all? For everything, Pat. Everything. Including his damn weather in Anglesey.
I feel that I respect him more now after this interview. You know, before, I didn't like him much. I shouldn't say yes, no.
Oh, yeah.
But no, after this interview, I must say I respect him more.
He comes across as a jovial character, and I think it's part of his image that he obviously gets on well with young people, and he is very approachable. We went up to Penrhys to film in the Rhondda, and that was such an experience just to see that. It did make us both very angry, so we were able to ask him the questions that were relating to what we did there.
So you've got good answers. Yes. Honest ones, anyway. You can be sure they'd be honest ones. Yeah. It's part of how a modern election has to be. There's no way you can avoid it. They're calling me now. This is another family picture.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Diolch yn fawr I chi. Diolch.
Oh, you met? Yes. Sorry, lovely. Rachel and Jonathan. Good kids.
Glenn, come in the picture, Glenn. Let's hope the picture comes out. Well, I don't need to tell you who's next. The two reporters we met last week from Children's Express, Albert Lynn and Jamie Zellamar, went to a secret Westminster location to meet Mrs. T.
Hello, Mrs. Thatcher. How do your jobs as a Prime Minister and as a mother compare?
Well, I couldn't really do a job as Prime Minister if my children were young. In this country, it takes quite a long time to get to being a Prime Minister. You see, I first went into Parliament in 1959. So I've been in there, 28 years. And I just don't think I could have concentrated on the greater responsibilities if my children were still young. They have some things in common. Let me make this quite clear. At home, you have to learn to live within the money you've got. You have to learn to budget. So you do with governments. And if you don't budget, if you borrow too much, you get into trouble. Your country gets into trouble. And if you borrowed too much at home, the family would soon be in financial difficulties. And, you know, people really tried to poke fun at this rather simple, straightforward belief of mine. They don't poke fun now. We've never got into difficulty with over-borrowing, because I, from the things which I learned at home and in a small business, say, no, you have to spend within your means.
Do you think it's harder for a woman to get into politics?
I think it is harder. It certainly is harder for a woman with a young family, because people would say, but you can't leave your home. I was lucky. My home is in London. The constituency I represent is in Greater London. And so when my children were 6, I was able to think, well, I'll try and go for Parliament. And I did, and successfully. But I was always at home every evening.
What are you doing for women? How are you helping them?
Well, we believe that women help themselves, and we're trying to get more and more opportunities for them. And we have legislation which makes discrimination against women for jobs illegal. But, you know, women are coming up, and they're taking much greater part in many of the professions than they used to. But we still have the same problem as you do. There are not enough women coming into politics.
Mrs. Thatcher, you've been in power for as long as I can remember.
Oh, isn't that nice? That's lovely. I've been Prime Minister for 8 years.
How do other countries view Great Britain?
I think at the moment they view Great Britain as having overcome many of her problems. We used to be called the sick man of Europe. We're not called that anymore.
How do you perceive yourself, and how do you think other people perceive you?
Oh, goodness me. I have really no idea. There are things called images these days. What puzzles me is that sometimes one's image can get so different from the kind of person one is. But I think it's for other people to say how they perceive one. I just try to be the same person.
If you had more money for children in Great Britain, what would you spend it on?
More money? I think most of us are very worried in this country by some things which happens to some children. Some are neglected, some are cruelly treated. And I think that that is the very worst thing which we have to face.
What are you doing to stop these problems?
Well, we have more police, we have social workers, we have something called neighbourhood watches, but it's not a thing which needs the help of government only. But we do say to people, look, the life of children is so precious that if you see or hear something which makes you think a child is being badly treated, then please let us know.
And what happens to the children if something does happen to them?
They are taken away from the people who are ill-treating them. They might go to what's called a foster mother, or they might go into a home which is run by social workers to look after these children.
What happens to children who are born into poverty?
Well, we have something rather different from anything which you have. We have something run by government which is called a supplementary benefit system. And so if you have no income, then, in fact, you are able to get a house and housing benefit is paid for you. And so everyone gets an income up to a certain level on condition that they are available to do a job if one should come up.
How do you deal with troubled kids who turn to crime or who are homeless?
It's a great worry, a very, very great worry. If they're homeless, they will come into care to be looked after by the local authority. But crime is a great worry because the peak age for criminal offences is the age of 15. In the end, you know, it's up to the person concerned whether they take to crime or whether they don't. And what government has to do is say, look, we can't make you be kind, considerate to one another. We can't make you good by legislation. But what we can do is to say that if you commit offences against your fellow citizens, against your fellow children, we will have quite tough sentences. It is a kind of world in which you should do as you would be done by.
And what problems are there in the educational system?
We're not very satisfied with our educational system, but we were finding that some of our children weren't coming out of school sufficiently able to read and write well enough, and sufficiently well versed in ordinary arithmetic and mathematics, and in wider general knowledge.
And if everything happened as it should,
then far many more young people would come out of school knowing certain basic things about language, about mathematics, certain basic things about science, certain basic things about geography and history. So they should really know how their lives fit into the background and really what kind of challenges which they have to take forward into the future.
Okay, it's been said that you've got everything that you've set out to get. What are your priorities from here?
Got everything that I've set out to get. Well, what are my priorities? First, a government has to be able to have a sure defence policy so that one's friends and allies know one's a reliable ally and a trusted friend. Secondly, it is really to give bigger and bigger opportunities to people who haven't had them and to enable more and more people to become what we would call the people's capitalism. If you have some talent, some ability, if you want something a little different, it's up to us as a government to enable you to have a larger and wider choice, because that's what freedom's all about.
So, Jamie, what did you expect from the Prime Minister, and what did you get?
I think that she was a good interviewee. She answered what she wanted to say. I mean, if there was something that she didn't want you to know, she didn't say it.
Yeah.
Well, I asked her about some kids, if what she would do, what Great Britain does about kids who get into crime. She seemed to not really say too much about that. She seemed to talk more about crime in general.
In some ways, maybe she should care more about women's issues. I don't think that she really does.
Well, I was trying to find out, since she's been around so long, do people still want her? And
Right.
she basically pretty much avoided it.
She says she cares. I don't know if she does, because it seems like children have about the same problems here that they do there in the United States.
Well, that's it. I hope you found our two programmes interesting. Perhaps now you're in a better position to advise your parents which way to vote next week. But remember, if you haven't seen anyone you would vote for, You can always take up politics as a career. Better than being out of work, eh? Bye. Roll the roller, Dale. Back to school next week.